Hello, 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 and welcome, my beautiful friends and family, to another episode of Beyond the podcast where we prepare for you a nice, calm, spicy dish, except we actually sneak the world's hottest pepper in there. Welcome to that episode. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so by using my Amazon link, amazonbrian.com. It'll redirect you to the homepage of Amazon. Anything you purchase within a 24-hour period of using that link will give us a small commission that helps us host this podcast. Now, you've joined us for a world news episode where we cover everything since the last episode, which is 2 weeks ago, that has happened in the world that's actually newsworthy. Not a bunch of BS politics stuff, but stuff that matters to you and to me. So, today we're going to go with about 9 stories here. It's a little bit less than usual, so we don't need to rush quite as hard. I'll try to slow my pace of speaking down. Now, first story here is, the headline is, Scientists Implant New Memories into Songbird's Brain. So this is pretty crazy. Researchers at the University of Texas Southwestern taught a zebrafinch new information using optogenetics, a technique that uses light to control living neurons that have been genetically modified to be light sensitive. That's insane. This information was then used to create a behavior response in the form of a chirpy song. So first off, just breaking that down, neurons are what your brain is made of. Those are what we're trying to create brain-machine interfaces by actually cutting holes into human skulls, putting little tiny electrodes the size of 1/10 of a human hair, and putting them individually, mapping them right next to neurons so they can be stimulated. And that's how we're planning on doing what they're doing right here. But this is a whole different thing that I've never even heard of. This is a different approach where you genetically modify the living being before it even grows up to have neurons in its brain that react to light. So you don't even need to do the whole surgery thing and implant anything in there. So the fact that this worked at all is pretty crazy. Reporting in the journal Science, the researchers found that artificially activating the neurons in the brain network could simulate a similar effect of experiencing and learning, and they were able to effectively teach this bird a half of a song. So there was an issue where, like, when they teach a song, the brain is used in 2 different halves, and they were only able to stimulate one half. So they're able to teach basically like syllables of the song with small amounts of the other part of the song not being absorbed by the bird. Again, this is just one of those stories where it's an interesting scientific piece that will end up leading to other scientific pieces that could be really crazy. Next up, maybe you guys know about Boston Genetics, is what it's called? Boston Dynamics, that's what it is, where they have basically all of their androids. They're basically like developing machines that are dynamically moving. So they have a dog-shaped one, like a quadrupedal machine, and they also have a humanoid, an android one that's, two legs, 2 arms. And this has been around for a couple of years now, but it used to be very basic. At first, what they were trying to work on was just keeping the android, we'll call it an android, Atlas, from falling. So just literally just being able to stand up and balance on its own. And then the next thing they worked on was being able to be pushed dynamically by somebody or get bumped into and not fall over. So they spent a lot of time on just like really seemingly basic stuff. Of course, it's very, very complex. But it's pretty cool because now, 2 years later, after getting through just, struggling to put a box on a shelf type of thing, they now have released this video where Atlas, this android, is doing basically some pretty difficult gymnastics that I bet you a lot of people wouldn't be able to do. So in the video, it displays handstands and tucks and somersaults. It does like a jump with like a split kick, kind of like a rock star. All this stuff, I know, like, when I see people reacting to these videos in the comments or just in real life, people are just like, cool. Like, woo, stupid looking CP3PO? C3PO? Wow. I need to catch up on my Star Wars, huh, boys? A lot of people just kind of write it off as not that big of a deal. But again, as this gets better and better and better, eventually we'll stop worrying about being able to make it jump dynamically, and it'll get to the point where we're working on individual toes being able to grab the ground. We'll be working on individual facial muscles being able to be simulated as if it was a human. We'll just keep moving the goalpost farther, which is pretty cool, but also is terrifying, especially if you pair this with artificial intelligence getting better. Eventually, you could have a point where we're literally going to have to come up with what are the ethics of these androids that have artificial intelligence. They are so smart that they pass all of the tests that we have come up with that indicate whether a organism is a living being or not, right? Like it has sentience. It knows that it exists. It knows what's going on in the world. It knows about dynamic change. You know what I mean? And there's going to be a point where we're like, is it okay to turn off that android that has had 14 years of life? You know what I mean? It has all these friends and whatnot. Is it okay? Because it is just a robot, but it has what we qualify as sentient. This is going to be a very interesting conversation that will happen. The other thing that's really interesting about this is that this Android, Atlas, is made completely of 3D printed parts. It only weighs about 180 pounds, which means that in the future, they would be able to make a lot of these fairly cheaply, because 3D printing is pretty good already, but it is just going to get better. And the materials and the filaments that they're going to use are just going to get better. So they're just going to be able to continue pumping these out for cheaper and cheaper. At the moment, they're trying to sell these to people individually. So I'm not sure exactly what people would need these for, maybe stocking warehouses and things like that. But again, it's just one of those technologies that just goes forward and gets crazier as we go. All right, jumping over a few. There's this crazy story that I heard about recently about India and one of their banks called the RBI, which is the Reserve Bank of India. This is an insane story. There's been quite a few insane stories with India and its banks. I won't get into those, but we'll get into this one. The headline is Panic at 137 bank branches as RBI limits withdrawals to 1,000 rupees. Now check this out, dude. They are limiting your withdrawal as a customer to only $14 per account each month for 6 months. So think about that in where you live, right? You're paying for we all have a bank account. Whatever we're paying for, we're all paying for from our bank account. And we usually pay for it digitally, right? We're generally not like going to the bank, pulling out $500 and then going to the cable company and giving them $200 and the electric, you know what I mean? So if your bank, if Chase Bank or Wells Fargo Bank said, hey, you can only pull out $20 a month from now on and pay $20, then everything, you can't do anything. Like, it's absolutely insane. And it's crazy that there's not more of an upheaval about this in terms of how the world is viewing this news. But I think it's just because there's so much of this crackpot news that comes out of India's financial world that it's just not even a surprise. It's just like, oh yeah, that's ridiculous. Moving on. And I feel bad because, while that is true, there has been quite a few other crazy things, such as, not too long, I think less than 6 months ago, they made it so that you just couldn't withdraw anything from your bank. And then they also at the same time made it illegal to use, or maybe not illegal, they made certain bills of certain amounts not usable anymore. So I think it was like the $1,000 and the $500 bill, and they said it's going to be not legal tender in 2 days, and also all of the banks are closed for the next 2 days. So they've done a lot of this crazy stuff before. The reason I'm pointing this out mostly is just to say, like, there's some crazy stuff going along in the world, especially in the financial world. A lot of people don't really focus on it, but India is one of the biggest by population places ever, and have to deal with this kind of stuff. It's crazy that in this day and age that kind of stuff exists. Okay, moving on to the next story. This one's pretty interesting. Scientists have bioengineered bacteria to pump out psilocybin. If you don't know psilocybin is the psychoactive ingredient inside of magic mushrooms that makes you experience magic mushrooms. So researchers in Miami University managed to transfer the DNA sequences responsible for psilocybin production from a mushroom into a microbe host, a strain of E. coli. And from that, it's been able to just pump out psilocybin. So they've gotten this to a point where they can, with a bunch of tweaking, they've been able to yield psilocybin at a concentration of 1.16 grams per liter, which is an insane amount. This is an interesting piece of news because it's not so much about the fact that they're able to synthesize psilocybin. Like this story isn't me saying like, hey, look, we're gonna all of a sudden have a bunch of psilocybin on the market, or it's gonna be legal or anything like that. The reason that they're doing this, I believe, is to basically perfect the science and the art of causing microbes to produce something that you want, basically manipulating microbes to create whatever it is that you want. If you've been following this news podcast for a while, the episodes of the news at least, we've recently covered, I think it was like 3 episodes back, that scientists were able to stimulate microbes to be able to produce casein protein, which is a protein that is exclusively found in milk, in dairy milk from cows. And this is a protein that a lot of manufacturers will take milk, pull the casein out, powderize it, and sell it as a protein powder. And the reason people buy it is because the casein is a slow digesting protein instead of a fast digesting protein. All that being said, just to say that scientists have already taken this method and replaced a inefficient method of getting casein by actually having to milk cows, pasteurize the milk, bring the milk somewhere, dehydrate the milk, process all the other stuff out of that dry powder, isolate the casein, and sell the casein. Now they have a method where they can just inject microbes with the right, catalyst material, and then they will just transform that directly into casein, which is a very efficient process. Even if it doesn't yield quite as much, you don't need to do anything, right? You just put those microbes in a lab over there and then just have them create it. You don't have to do any extra processes. So all you need to do is just create huge factories with large amounts of space, and it would do that. Now, I point this out just to say that we now have 2 of these stories where they have caused a microbe to create something that it really shouldn't be able to create, like where it's removing the whole process that used to need to be in place to get that substance, psilocybin or casein, having to grow mushrooms and then dry them out, whatnot, etc., and then you get psilocybin. Now, we just can bypass nature, really, and no longer do we have to grow it, create it, etc. We can just have microbes pump it out. Think about where this goes with other things, right? A lot of stuff is very cheap to synthesize, so you wouldn't synthesize that. But there's a lot of stuff that's not cheap to synthesize. It's very difficult to synthesize, and this would be amazing for that kind of a thing. Think like, like specialized blood types or white cells, right? That kind of stuff being able to be pumped out by microbes in huge amounts would be amazing. How many times have you heard, you should donate blood because you never know, it could save someone's life? And how many times, I'm sure, have people died because there wasn't the right blood type on deck at that hospital at that time when that person showed up? If you had an extra floor under every hospital that was a laboratory, which I'm sure they already do, and you just had microbes pumping out, a few liters of each type of blood each day. Any excess was just sold off or used or however, and then each next day there was another new fresh batch. You could save a lot of lives. So that's my point with that one. That one is really cool. Now, going along with this kind of how it could help with medicine and health, I think this is a really cool story too. Japanese scientists create artificial blood that could potentially be given to all blood types. I mean, already with that headline, that's awesome. Scientists in Japan have developed artificial blood that could, in theory, be transfused into patients regardless of their blood type. It's still extremely early days for the research so far. It's only been tested out on 10 rabbits with mixed success. However, if it moves to human trials, this could be a very exciting breakthrough. Currently, if you need to receive a blood transfusion, it must be matched with your blood type. A one-size-fits-all blood substitute would overcome all sorts of existing articles. According to the World Health Organization, 117 billion units of donated blood are collected globally each year, and that's still not enough. So I guess this is just making my point from the last story, is that we still don't have enough blood, even with the amount of blood that is being donated, which is 117 billion. That's crazy. Reported in a journal Transfusion, researchers in Japan set out to develop an artificial blood surrogate that can mimic and fulfill the functions of biological blood. Typically, hemoglobin in the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen to the body's tissue and returns carbon dioxide back to the blood. As a substitute for this vital protein, the team developed hemoglobin vesicles with a diameter of 250 nanometers that can serve as an oxygen carrier. Along with liposome-based hemostatic nanoparticles, this was mixed with plasma, the yellowish liquid base of blood. So, to break all this story down and stop reading a bunch more, that's cool. They're basically making an artificial, synthetic hemoglobin, so that no longer does the hemoglobin have to be perfect for your blood type. They can just have it be synthesized and be I can match every blood type. That's insane to me. but very cool. Very cool. And see, so just to tie this in together, both of these stories create a path to having no need for blood to be donated, or create a future where we can supplement the donated blood with the less common blood types. Either of these stories, if either of these scientific experiments actually pan out and go forth, then either one could yield great results, and likely both will yield great results. I think people sleep on the amount of science and stuff that's happening right now, but it is going to lead to such an interesting, amazing, and bright future where, again, people in the future will look back at the things that we have issues with medicine and health and whatnot, and they're going to be going, what in the hell? You had to deal with, whatever, right? You had to deal with Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. You had to deal with diabetes and that's ancient time stuff, right? Just like how we think about the plague as ancient or leprosy as ancient, right? This next story is kind of a fun one. Well, we'll see. It's kind of just like just a news story. Woman mistakes wasabi for avocado and ends up in the hospital with something called the broken heart syndrome. I don't know what that means yet. Actually, I haven't read this story quite yet. It snuck into my tabs here. But a woman in Israel has become the first person ever to get broken heart syndrome from food after mistaking a big blob of wasabi for a normal-sized portion of harmless avocado. I feel like as soon as you put it in your mouth, you'd be like, this is not avocado. And then you'd breathe out and your nose would burn. I don't know. The woman's in her late 60s, showed up to an emergency room with chest pains. During the party that she was at, she saw what she thought was avocado dip and ate some. Unfortunately, her taste buds confirmed, and her chest pains later corroborated it was a large amount, around the size of a teaspoon of wasabi paste. 5 minutes later, she started to feel sudden pressure in her chest, which radiated into her arms. This lasted for several hours, but she decided to stay at the wedding, and eventually the pain began to die down. The next day, she felt uncomfortable and weak, so she sought out medical attention. Doctors ruled out heart failure, but an ECG showed dysfunction in her left ventricle. Takotsubo-cardiomyopathy is a left ventricular dysfunction that typically occurs in older women after sudden, intense emotional or physical stress. Whoa, this is a real thing? You can have dysfunction in your heart by just having an intense emotional response or being under physical stress. I feel like that a lot of people are in danger of having this happen to them. Interesting. And it looks like she ended up being okay. And then they mention a bunch of other people. Apparently a lady in Texas who was also 61. She had this same condition after her dog died in 2017. So a lot of different reasons can cause it. Okay, so this is interesting because today I was actually going to go eat a raw onion and wasabi all in the same challenge for an Instagram video. Don't ask me why, because I try to entertain. That's why. But so when I read that story at the first, I had to click on it because I was like, wait, can I get broken heart syndrome because I eat wasabi? And it looks like, no, I'll be fine. Cross your fingers for me. Next story I think is really, really cool is prosthetic leg that wires into the nerves could massively improve quality of life. So if you know anything about prosthetic limbs and whatnot, they're generally just what they are, right? Like they are a hard piece of prosthetic that attaches to the limb that needs to be extended, and then that's pretty much it. Like the hand doesn't move a lot, or it doesn't move at all. The leg is generally unmoving minus the ankle piece, but that's kind of an automatic thing. We've been thinking and trying to make amputated people have prosthetics that actually respond to their movement wants, their impulses from their brain. And we've had some success with this, but it is very limited. Like you can see the tests of people doing it, and they'll be thinking, because they'll have like the prosthetic hand out in front of them, and the scientists will say, think about clenching your fist. And then the prosthetic, you'll see it slowly start to squeeze into a fist. Now, it's a very slow thing, and it wouldn't be practical in terms of reaction times or needing to do anything on a regular day-to-day basis. But it's just, again, the first step on a staircase that leads to some pretty cool stuff. So anyways, here's this story. Reporting their findings in STM, researchers have tested a new prosthesis on 3 above-knee leg amputees, dubbed a neuroprosthesis. That's cool, a neuroprosthesis. The device stimulates nerves in the leg, which in turn helps the wearer to feel when the knee or foot is being touched. This allows for better detection of objects that might trip you up and creates the feeling that the prosthesis is truly a part of the body. Currently available prostheses rely only on sensation where the artificial limb meets the body. Yeah, so you would have the pressure up at your knee when your foot hit the ground, and you would be like, okay, there's the ground. This is awesome stuff. The new device is built on a commercially available lower leg prosthesis, but has added sensors in the knee and sole of the foot, which create the sensations of balance and pressure, which can then be transferred to the nerves via tiny electrodes surgically implanted in the leg. This is what's up, dude. I'm team electrode all the way. It's crazy that we have these 1/10 of the size of a human hair electrodes that we can wire into your brain or even your nerve endings in your leg or arm, in your body, and literally synthetically create feeling, smell, touch, taste, vision, etc. Like I said with the other story, there are so many of these things happening and they all lead to the same place, which is exciting because we don't just have one path that hopefully it works and if it fails, it's over. We have so many, and most likely, again, like I said, not one of them is going to succeed, but many of them. So this prosthesis is going to happen, and then also the brain interface implant chip is going to happen. So you could have, 3 prosthetic legs and arms and a brain chip, and because the brain chip is simulating everything that you would have felt with, your normal hands and arms and legs, you would have the exact same feeling as someone who did not have prosthetics, right? You'd be able to feel everything, be very accurate. You'd be able to even change it so that it looks in your head, it looks just like a natural arm or leg, a limb. That is so cool. In the newer study, 3 participants tried out the prosthesis and became more adept at activities such as walking upstairs and navigating an obstacle course when equipped with their new limb. Meanwhile, they were determining when their artificial leg was being touched, even when blindfolded and deafened with earplugs. That's dope. In addition to these physical improvements, the amputees also fared better psychologically. They felt a greater sense of ownership of their prosthesis as it felt more like a part of their body and were less worried about their leg when partaking in activities. That's awesome. Overall, the participants were more agile, mobile, and less likely to fall over when they encountered an object that they hadn't spotted with their eyes. They could climb stairs almost a third faster than they would otherwise and were more relaxed when using their prosthesis. Recent years have been seeing some incredible advancements when it comes to prostheses, but back in 2016, researchers reported the first prosthesis to connect directly to muscle, nerves, and bone, which allowed an arm amputee to operate heavy... Gosh damn. The freaking bug has crawled into my throat and it's trying to kill me. Moving forward, which allowed an arm amputee to operate heavy machinery and handle an egg without breaking it. That was in 2016, and now we've moved even farther. Scientists managed to wire a prosthetic hand directly into a woman's nerves, giving her movement and a sense of touch. If this kind of tech can be made one day commercially available, it could have tangible, life-changing impacts on all sorts of people. This is just the breeding ground for this technology. Of course, we're working on helping people who have limited lives because of this kind of thing, or limited motion, et cetera, et cetera. But this just goes in so many different paths. In the future, you could, I mean, honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but you could just have people replacing their arms and legs without even having any issues with their arms and legs, just because the prosthetic ones have extra features. You know what I mean? Like, so say, maybe even if it's not every single citizen, maybe it's just people in specialized jobs. Say you're in a construction job, right? And you get your arm torn off, boom, prosthetic, that's better than your original arm. Or if you're going to go into construction, before anything even happens, say you know that you're going to be swinging a super heavy hammer and you've known that every person who's been in that job destroys their shoulders and elbows by 2-3 years, and it's really painful. You just replace it before you even get into it, and then you can do the job more effectively. I can imagine 100 million different ways that this can be transformed. If you go to space, maybe you replace a lot of your body with things that would fare better in space, with the pressure changes, with the temperatures, and with the radiation that your body absorbs versus what we as humans naturally can absorb. Anyways, moving forward with the last story here. NASA chief scientist says we're close to finding life on Mars, but we're not ready. So this is pretty interesting. Next year, 2 planned missions to send rovers to Mars will drill deep into the surface in the search for extraterrestrial life, which means we could find out the answer in the next couple of years. If we are successful, it will be revolutionary, but we're not prepared for this momentous occasion, says Dr. Jim Green, who's the director of NASA's Planetary Science Division. NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA, in partnership with Russia's Roscosmos, are both sending rovers to drill for samples, hoping to find organic matter. NASA's 2020 rover will drill into rock formations to collect samples and send them back to Earth. The first time material from Mars will visit our planet, which that will be dope. Could be dangerous. Who knows? But also the ESAs will also be drilling for samples, crushing up and analyzing them on Mars itself. This is what Dr. Green says, there's no reason to think that there isn't civilizations elsewhere because we are finding exoplanets all over the place. This concept of what a Goldilocks zone looks like has to be modified. Now, there's a few thoughts that I have with this. One, it's cool. This is something we've always kind of speculated, is that there might be life on other planets, but especially the ones that have had or have water currently. The ones that had water, where it's burned off the surface, possibly the life doesn't exist anymore, but we can learn from finding the fossils or whatever form of life we could find. Or some of them have gone into hibernation. There are organisms that we found. I forget the name of it. It's like a tar something bear. It's this really tiny, really microscopic little organism that can actually survive in the vacuum of space. It's the only living organism that can do that. And the reason it can do this is because it basically puts itself into a state of cryogenic freezing, kind of, if you want to say it that way. Basically, it's just kind of like a bear. It goes into hibernation mode. And in space, it will just basically like slow or stop. And then when you bring it back to somewhere where it can thrive, it'll just turn all its functions back on and be fully living. This basically tore apart the idea that there couldn't be other life forms because they wouldn't survive the harsh environments of space. But that's just applying Earth logic to the universe, right? Like, why would all of life have to be just like humans or mammals even, and have to have oxygen and this much atmospheric pressure and this much temperature? Why? And so because of that, it's changed our idea of how likely life is on other planets, which is why exactly we're looking at planets that have water and we're saying there's probably life there. It might be a little different than what we expect or think of as life here. Now, here's where I go. That last thing that Dr. Green said, where he said there's no reason to think that there isn't civilizations elsewhere. There's something called the Fermi Paradox, which is basically the idea that if there is alien life, if there is life outside of just our planet, it would be basically impossible for us to not have either found it or it found us. Because if there is one other life form or civilization out there, then statistically, scientifically, it would be just nearly impossible for there not to be more than one, right? Because, you know what I mean? In billions of instances, why would there only be 2 out of a billion, not 3 or 4 or 5 or 1,000? And if there were 1,000, then that means that the chances of us being the first one that has ever reached interplanetary travel, being able to do space travel, is extremely small and not likely at all. And even at that, even if we are the very first planet, very first species to reach interplanetary travel, we have been broadcasting for 100 years, just basically broadcasting radio waves out into space to tell whatever life forms out there who we are, what we are, where we are, which means that also other life forms would be doing this too, even if they couldn't travel. And we can send those waves extremely far. And on top of that, not only can, other species possibly have better reception than we do, we could also receive theirs. So possibly they have better sending than we do. And so even with us not being able to receive, signals from 1 billion light years away, if it was the same as a human radio wave, maybe they're sending it at a much more amplified radio wave. Point being, it's an oddly weird paradox because you want to be on both sides. You want to be on the side where you say that aliens probably exist because that's awesome. It's so it just seems so likely. There's so many instances out there where they could exist, but at the same time, that paradox does ring so true. If they exist, why do they not exist? You know what I mean? Why do we not see them? Why do we not have any evidence of it at all? And if we do find them one day, is that going to be it? Are we just going to be like, oh, cool, we found the Mars organisms, and then it's going to be a really long time till we find the next ones? Is it just that they're all hiding from us until we do finally get to the level of intelligence where they're like, okay, now they can actually play on our board. Now we can introduce them to the entire galaxy civilizations. Who knows? It's an interesting thought, and I'll leave us on that because I could probably babble about space for the next couple of hours. I really like this. If you guys are into space stuff, first off, of course, you should be following SpaceX and Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk's companies for space travel. But if you like conceptual stuff about where the science is right now and what we could do in the future, there's a YouTube channel called Isaac Arthur, and he basically goes into all this kind of stuff, and it's really very interesting, like how we could build habitats in space where people live instead of on planets, how we can reach planets that take more than a human's lifetime of travel time just by having generation ships where you have kids and those kids have kids, and then basically your grandkids are the ones who would actually reach the planet. You would have already died 100 years into flight, you know what I mean? And it's a 300-year flight or something like that. It's a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, like I said, I will end there. I appreciate you guys coming into this podcast. This is definitely by far, I want to say my favorite, maybe top 3 favorite things that I do in terms of content creation, but I think it might be number 1. So I appreciate you guys supporting these, and the fact that you do makes it so that I can keep making these because people out there listening, and it's cool to know that my audience is interested in the future of the world of Warcraft. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening to Beyond the podcast where we send you on an interplanetary flight, but we screwed up and you're not actually going to get there. You're just going to die in space. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by using my Amazon link, like I said earlier, but also if you're into audiobooks, you can check out audible.com, but you can go and use my link, which is audiblebrian.com. It'll redirect you there. You'll get 2 free books and a free month trial. You can cancel it as soon as you start it. That way you don't have to pay the second month, or you can continue if you love it. And that helps us a lot, actually, a really big amount. And there's some really good books out there. All right, guys, I love you so much. Thank you for checking out the podcast, and we'll see you in the very next one. Adios.